and welcome to our podcast featuring myself, Karianne Peak, Diana Burdeina, and Sóla Leban. Today we will be discussing the modern applications of Immanuel Kant's idea of perpetual peace. Kant's Critique of Pure Reason was published in 1781, and much has changed in the 200 years since. From new nations to world wars, global relations have undergone significant changes. And today we will be analyzing whether or not Kant's ideas are applicable today. We will examine the EU, discuss modern crises, and ultimately answer the question, is perpetual peace an achievable ideal? Now we turn to Diana, who will provide discussion on the European Union.
Hi everyone, I'm going to be talking about how the EU ideology is connected to Kant's one. Kant envisioned a world where peace would be achieved not through world government, but through a federation of republican states that would voluntarily bind themselves to the rule of law. The EU is one of the examples of Kant's model. The EU aligns with the first two of Kant's definitive articles from a perpetual peace, republicanism, and the federation of free states. The first definitive article of peace is republican constitutions. The first point that Kant made is that the civil constitution of each state shall be republican because republicanism ensures the protection of public rights, both internally and externally. And secondly, republics include the principle of the freedom of the members of society as human beings and the principle of the dependence of all as subject on a common legislation. And additionally, republicanism ensures the law of the equality of the members of citizens. This definitive article is being clearly reflected in the EU's ideology because Kant believes that republics were less likely to wage war because their citizens would hesitate to authorize conflict. Decisions about war would be made not by monarchs or elites but by citizens who would bear its cost because of their lives and resources, and as a result, republics would act with greater caution and more responsibility. The EU's emphasis on the belief in common decision-making, legal integration, and peaceful dispute resolution reflects in the belief that political institutions rooted in public reasons and law will eventually be better at establishing and maintaining peace. The requirement for democratic governance ensures that member states are not only politically compatible, but are also capable of engaging in processes that reflect the will of other people. And this institutional design create a form of what Kant called public right, where the use of power is governed by law and subject of rational justification. And this logic also supports the EU's forming principle of never again war in Europe. And then the second principle connects the European Union and Kant's ideology. It is the federation of free states. Kant rejects the idea of global centralized government because he fears it could become a tyranny, and instead he suggests the horizontal alliance, which is a league that is united not by force but by shared laws and principles. For Kant, it is about creating a lawful international order where mutual security would be prioritized over domination of the one state. And he also proposes the idea of a convent of peace, which claims that once under a binding social contract, one cannot further delegate their authority to a higher entity as well. The EU reflects this in many key events. Firstly, the membership is voluntarily for everyone because states can choose to join the EU or stay on their own if they wish to do so. And talking about common laws and agreements, members of European Union are bound by common legal and political framework, for example, like Treaty of Lisbon or the European Court of Justice, which later influences the way member states interact with each other. And additionally, going back to the creation of the EU that was formed after World War II, which the main goal to prevent future conflicts in Europe by tying countries together economically and politically. This is a great example of application of Kant's idea that law and interdependence among states can prevent war from occurring. And then lastly, the EU started as a small alliance, but over time it keeps including more and more members in, just like Kant imagined. And now let me hand it over to Sóla, who will continue the discussion of the modern crisis and how they affected global relations.
Kant envisioned peace based not on domination, but mutual respect amongst the republics. We can think of the EU, UN, or the Paris Climate Agreement as modern attempts to reflect Kant's philosophies. However, things aren't that simple. In today's world, we face the return of nationalist politics, which threatens the states working together towards a universal goal, furthermore jeopardizing the state of international peace. Take Brexit. In 2016, the United Kingdom voted to leave the EU. This movement was more than gaining back economic freedom. It was also made to reclaim sovereignty and reject the idea that Britain should be subject to laws they didn't directly control. A key part of Kant's proposal is the idea that peace requires a voluntary surrender of sovereignty to shared institutions. So while Brexit doesn't fully go against his theory, it does highlight how fragile these alliances are. Peace requires constant effort, and without it, we revert to rivalry, conflict, and distrust. Brexit wasn't just Britain separating from the rest of Europe. Brexit reshaped global trades and alliances and created an ideological fallout. First, the UK had to renegotiate dozens of trade agreements that were previously made with the EU. Some of these agreements remained, however, those relating to EU access were significantly more complicated. As for global alliances, the separation of the UK and the EU weakened their collective. Their special relationship between the UK and the US has become strained as the US historically relied on the UK as an EU political and economical entry point into Europe. Recently, France has become the US military ally as it now is the only major military force in the EU. While the UK has emphasized that Brexit will not affect their commitment to NATO, they no longer have a seat in the European Council where states coordinated their national defense policies. When the United Kingdom left the EU, it stepped away from a shared political organization that for decades had symbolized a new kind of internationalism, which went directly against Kant's hope for an integrated, peaceful world built on collaboration.
Now we will hold a roundtable discussion on the points we've covered. We've established a few questions that we will all discuss and answer together, ending with the question, is perpetual peace a realistic goal? So for our first question we have, would countries ever be willing to fully abolish their militaries?
I don't see that happening at all.
I feel like for countries, military is kind of a thing that keeps them separate and sure in tomorrow, because if they would give up all of it, I feel like some of the countries would feel okay, but the others would feel more insecure and they would be more willing to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because there's no way to have that complete assurance that everyone has gotten rid of all their military and their technology. And there's also the point of the technology has already been discovered and developed. We've already had arms races. Like, there's no way that can just be forgotten and completely gotten rid of and have everyone on a blank slate there.
Yeah. I think, like, when I think about the countries that don't really have, like, any military, like, my family's from Iceland, we don't have any military, but we also have no history of violence, or countries don't have any problem with us because we haven't been involved in all these conflicts. So I feel like the countries that have been involved in all these conflicts will always kind of feel like a threat, and they're also so big. So I feel like it would only be like smaller countries. But then again, no, because like smaller countries need protection from the bigger countries.
And again, having no military can create a sense of dependency on bigger countries, creating like dominance by a more powerful state that will still dominate in the military, so it can be fully excluded.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like that kind of ties into our other question of, do modern technologies make perpetual peace more achievable or more difficult to achieve? Because that kind of ties into the idea of all the military technologies being developed. It just makes other countries who don't have it more uneasy, because no matter what sort of treaties or alliances that are in place, I feel like there's always this sense of never like truly knowing what another country could be thinking or what their intentions are.
I think even like not just like military technologies, but literally just like social media. I feel like we see with issues like Israel and Palestine or Russia and Ukraine, the information that people are getting is often from social media, but all these things are algorithm based, so you only receive really one side of the conflict, and I think it creates a really big division because no one's getting both sides. I think that creates honestly more difficulty in trying to achieve perpetual peace, because I think it kind of divides people even more.
Yeah, and it also creates a sense that technology can bring war to the other level, when war is not only physical, but you can again tie into social media. You can have even like fights there, or on the level with like breaking technology during the conflict, like from your opponent's country, because I'm from Ukraine and I know that issue when they challenge also your technological ability to perform. So well, it can be useful because it's development and it can help you fight, but it can also work vice versa when you get hurt because of it.
Yeah,
and it's not to mention like fake news. Like, it's so rampant in social media today. Like, countries will launch like fake news attacks just on social media, where they specifically put out fake news to weaken the other side of a conflict. So that's like a whole nother area where there's just all these different levels that countries can attack each other now, that it's not even just about the military anymore like it was with Kant. Like, there's other areas where conflict pops up as well.
Yeah, there's a lot more layers now.
Okay, moving on to our next question. We have, does the EU promote true cooperation, or is it more in the interests of stronger countries such as like Britain or France?
I feel like more powerful states will always have more influence and more power, which is, I don't think it really ties with the idea of Kant's perpetual peace, and I think it's like the biggest challenge why it is not fully working as Kant established it. I think that's one of the biggest issues, that countries are not always equal, and while these powerful countries can help smaller countries to overcome their issues, they still would have more dominance in like media, as we mentioned, or military that we've talked before and covered. So that's not always about equality.
I feel like as well, many of the preliminaries that Kant established to promote perpetual peace, it just directly contradicts a lot of things that how we perceive our world, and like who has the power, like having the no foreign funding, no legal interference between states. Like, that is just a baseline when it comes to global affairs today. Countries will help each other, they'll impose tariffs on each other, and I think the relationships have become so, like, they're not straightforward. There's these like very, like, there's it on the trade level, there's on like a legal level. So I think as well, within the EU, like you were discussing with Brexit, Sóla, like, it wasn't just to leave. The reason for leaving was to establish that Britain was still powerful on its own. It didn't want something else designating its laws.
Yeah. Moving on to the next question. How should we weigh sovereignty against global cooperation? So, like, when is national autonomy more important? And is there a line where that should come before international responsibility?
I would say that this is a pretty tricky question, and it kind of shows the weaknesses in Kant's arguments and the contradictions he had, because he wants this cooperation, but he also says you shouldn't be giving up your sovereignty once you've already given it to someone. So it contradicts that idea of having your sovereignty to your nation, but then also to this overlying organization or whatever it is that designates laws on an international level. And I think with the rise of nationalism in certain countries, like especially the US, no one wants to give up that power. And I think that's kind of a major hurdle that we would have to overcome if we wanted to pursue this idea of perpetual peace. I think people get really caught up in their national ideals. But for me personally, I think that if it were attainable and it was something that seemed realistic, then I think you should always try and cooperate. But again, it's that threat of not knowing who is controlling your sovereignty and not knowing if you can trust them. That's a major barrier people have.
Yeah, I feel like Kant, also with what you said, it contradicts because in some cases he puts international like cooperation and all of that sometimes before even national autonomy, which now, as you mentioned, with the rise of nationalism, also in the EU, wouldn't be probably possible because people would be more interested in like protecting themselves, and they would care more about their own country rather than cooperating. So I feel like with cooperation, it is important. The line is probably where people are willing to do that, and they do that because not only because of their own interest, but because they are also willing to help and cooperate with each other, like EU, like we can also talk about NATO in this case. So they're also willing to protect each other. But if it's only purely about self-interest and national autonomy, then probably it would be even harder to establish and say that it's international cooperation or organization if you only think about your interest and about your nation.
Yeah, and I think Kant's like proposal also was that peace requires voluntary surrender. You have to choose to be a part of cooperation. It's not something that like you can be forced into. You have to choose it. So yeah, I really agree with what you said.
Yeah, and I would say now we're kind of leading into our last question of, is perpetual peace even a realistic political goal in our modern world today? And there's many things to consider here, like just regarding the history that's happened since Kant's time, like all the colonization, the wars, the divisions between countries. Like it's a lot to think about, and it can be kind of tricky to even imagine a world where we have this idea of perpetual peace.
I think it sounds naive. Is like the word that I think of is perpetual peace. It sounds naive.
I'm thinking about it as a very idealized idea, if you can say it like that, because that would be in some kind of perfect world where wars wouldn't occur due to like all of the things that are happening, but because we still, as we mentioned before in our discussion, we still have a sense of nationalism and of belonging to something, not just like international community, we won't be able probably to establish that now and in the nearest future for sure.
Yeah, so like really what I was thinking there is that it could be possible, but it just doesn't seem like something that could happen um like in the near future. And that was something Kant recognized, saying that the certain points of his preliminaries didn't need to be immediately met as long as you had plans in place.
Yeah.
But while I would like to believe that it is possible, it seems like it would take many, many years for.
Not an hour.
And it's
Yeah.
also so much time passed since Kant said that, and we still
Yeah.
are
That's
far
true.
from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anything, it seems like the more likely thing was. I remember he said there are two ways to get perpetual peace. You can either find a way to cooperate or just get rid of the enemy. And it seems like the way we're headed, it's more likely that someone's going to get rid of someone else. And it's not how you want to think, but it's hard to imagine something else right now. Did anyone have any final comments on that? Or
Okay.
I will go ahead with the conclusion then. You want to jump right into it?
Go for it.
Okay. So the idea of perpetual peace is an ideal few would disagree with, but in the face of current global challenges, a world without war or conflicts can feel out of reach. The European Union is seen as the closest modern realization of Kant's ideas, so it itself is not without its problems. After everything we've explored today, we hope you don't take this as the final word, but rather as a starting point, a chance to reflect and form your own perspective. In a world that often feels to be in constant conflict with itself, belief in the possibility of peace is more important than ever. Without those who believe that Kant's perpetual peace is achievable, it will never come to fruition. Whether it takes 10 years or 50, change is inevitable, and it's up to us to decide what kind of future we move towards. Thank you for listening.